I now give the floor to the representative of Benin to introduce the statement of the Minister.
Monsieur le
President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have now been meeting here for a week as part of the general debate, as is customary, but unfortunately in unusual conditions. The COVID-19 pandemic, far from bringing us apart, despite the social distancing that we have to engage with, brings us back together around the subject of multilateralism. My delegation remains convinced that together we will find the best solution, and that we will work towards getting a vaccine and adequate treatment. While we do that, we wish to recall our attention towards the scourge of false medicines. We need proper collective effort to avoid that particular tragedy for our populations in trying to find the solution to this pandemic. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thus have the honour to introduce His Excellency Mr. Aurélien Agbenonci, the Foreign Minister and Minister for Cooperation of Benin, to make his statement to this Assembly.
Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée Générale.
President of the General Assembly, Heads of State, Government and Delegation, Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. His Excellency Mr. Patrice Talon, the President of Benin, Head of State and Head of Government, asked me to deliver this statement on his behalf. And I quote, I would like to begin by reiterating to you, Mr. Volkan Bozkir, my warm congratulations on your election as President of this august Assembly, and to assure you of the support and full cooperation of Benin in carrying out your work. I also wish to hail the remarkable work done by your predecessor, Ambassador Tijani Mohamed Bande, for his actions in the service of the United Nations and its member states. I wish to take this opportunity to share Benin's gratitude with Mr. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, and to renew our support to him. The world is facing the COVID-19 pandemic. I wish to take this opportunity to offer my sincere condolences to all those countries who have suffered deaths and to express our solidarity with those who are affected by this scourge. States are mobilizing to face this health crisis. At this time, my country welcomes the fact that the United Nations and its specialized agencies, in particular the WHO, are making it a priority. Benin greatly esteems the theme of this current session, which is titled The Future We Want, the UN We Need, reaffirming our commitment to multilateralism, confronting COVID-19 through effective multilateral action. This subject puts us before our responsibilities and commits us to renewing our faith in multilateralism and the ideals of the UN Charter. It reminds us of the urgent need for collective action to find solutions over the long term to the challenges we face, the most pressing of which is, as you know, COVID-19. Benin is continuing its efforts with the commitment of all of the people and the support of the international community in facing this pandemic and its consequences, and above all, to ensure the recovery of our economy, which, as is the case with many countries, has been very severely affected. In this framework, my government has, among other things, set up a vast programme to the value of 200 billion CFA francs to support both formal and informal enterprises, as well as smaller businesses and vulnerable people. I wish to thank the United Nations and its member states, as well as all international organisations, for the help they have provided to developing countries in general and Benin in particular in planning and putting in place strategies to respond to the pandemic. Thanks to our joint efforts, the train of contamination has been limited in my country, meaning that Benin has been able to keep its rates of contamination and its death rates low. The COVID-19 pandemic is indeed one of the most serious crises to public health in modern history. This threat, should not, however, lead us to lose sight of the fight against HIV/AIDS and other illnesses that threaten our communities. Combating this scourge requires management of all of the difficulties we see in the modern world, but also a coordinated international response and reinforced cooperation at global level. This is why Benin, through my person, reiterates its attachment to the promotion and strengthening of multilateralism as the only framework for states to work together to resolve their modern problems of all kinds, and where the fight against poverty is a priority. Ladies and gentlemen, in September 2016, during the general debate of the 71st session of the UN General Assembly, I stressed that mass poverty constitutes a major threat to humanity, and that we have to set up proactive collective action to eradicate it. 4 years later, this appeal remains timely. I here reiterate the need for an urgent global programme to eradicate this form of poverty through collective and proactive action. It is multilateralism that has allowed the United Nations to give the world the Paris Climate Agreement, and it should be the tool that also allows us to achieve this other objective. In this regard, I hail the courageous reforms undertaken by the Secretary-General to reposition the United Nations system on development. Benin, my country, supported Resolution 72/279, which aims to strengthen the institutional development architecture of the United Nations to make it more effective. Benin also supports unequivocally the intergovernmental negotiations on Security Council reform. This reform, we are convinced, would allow us to repair the historic injustice done to Africa, the only continent not represented among the permanent members of the Security Council. Benin also reaffirms through my person the urgent need to attribute 2 of the non-permanent council seats to African countries under the Esselwini Consensus. Ladies and gentlemen, peace and accord between states is the fundamental axis of Benin's foreign policy. My country therefore reaffirms its support for diplomatic initiatives to create a viable Palestinian state which enjoys full international sovereignty and lives in peaceful coexistence with the State of Israel. On the Cuban embargo, Benin believes that the current COVID-19 context should allow us to take specific measures leading to the total and definitive lifting of this embargo. Despite the pandemic, we unfortunately are seeing the embargo strengthened. My country once again launches an appeal for the regularization of relations between Cuba and the United States in the interests of the peoples of both countries and the entire world. Mr. President, since April 2016, Benin has been committed to deep reforms in political and economic sectors, aiming to improve its economy, to create an environment for investment, to fight corruption, and to lead to other benefits. Benin has also therefore decided to leave behind the errors of the past to commit to rigorous and uncompromising government in all of its sectors. My government is methodically working to employ major reforms through its action programs whose objectives are aligned with the SDGs. The results have been achieved and been hailed both at national and international level. These have convinced the people of the country that with some seriousness and rigour it is possible for our country to leave the past behind and find the path towards development and prosperity. My government will continue its path, which will lead inexorably to the radical transformation of the lives of the towns and cities of Benin, as well as the countryside, access to drinking water for all of the people, and electricity, which until 2016 was considered a luxury and a privilege. The programme of actions of my government also provides a priority in terms of preserving the environment and energy transition. Actions stipulated in our framework chime with the objectives and priorities in the Paris Agreement on climate change. I launched an appeal on the 15th of November 2016 in Marrakesh during the Conference of the States Parties to the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, calling for the creation of an international research centre to respond to the effect of climate change on agriculture. This received a favourable response from other states. I take the opportunity from this high rostrum to salute those states, regional groups and the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change for sparing no effort to achieve the necessary consensus to actually set up this centre. President, heads of state and government, and delegation, ladies and gentlemen, Benin belongs to a sub-region that is more and more under stress because of the degradation of the security situation. The number of victims of terrorist violence unfortunately continues to increase, in particular in the Sahel. This situation requires joint efforts and pooling of actions to overcome it. In this respect, I welcome the Plan of Action 2020 to 2024, adopted by ECOWAS in December 19, to provide for an effective and integrated fight against this scourge in the West African sub-region. Furthermore, I wish to state Benin's solidarity alongside the members of the G5 Sahel and to call on the international community to support regional efforts for increased support for the fight against terrorism in Africa. Together, we will surely be able to stabilise the different regions of Africa and to create conditions for their development and the flourishing of their respective populations. I thank you for your kind attention. End of quote.
Au nom de l'Assemblée Générale,
on behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation from Benin for the statement he has just made.